You're inspiring. Great man of courage. Listen, it's Easter. Last year, I don't know if you remember, there's a lot of people that have joined our church in the last 12 months, but last year, Pastor Brian was not here in Sydney or Australia. He was on location. We got the whole Easter message from Israel. You remember that? It was beautiful. Well, Pastor Brian is not in Israel. But let's have a look where he is.
In the time of the Gospels, much of the known world, including Israel, was occupied and ruled by the Roman Empire. The empire was a symbol of strength, wealth, and power. Their ruler and lord was Caesar, who was exalted and even worshipped for his often ruthless intent on extending his empire. He was considered a son of the gods, and the phrase "Caesar is Lord" was a common way of pledging allegiance to the emperor and the Roman Empire. His kingdom was impressive, spectacular, and feared. It displayed military might and material opulence, everything Jesus' kingdom did not appear to be. So when Jesus was asked by Pilate whether he was king, Jesus himself said, "My kingdom is not from this world." By both the religious leaders and Pilate, Jesus was dangerous because he proposed an alternative kingdom, one that could be seen as opposing Caesar. Condemned by the Roman prefect Pilate, crucified by Roman soldiers, guarded by a Roman centurion, but the supposed rebel wasn't robbed of his life, he gave it. The Roman soldiers that made a crown out of thorns didn't know that they were coronating the King of Kings. It was the gospel according to Rome, and it all started with the Roman cross on that terribly Good Friday.
Well, here we are in Rome. Bobby and I have just come from Colour Conference in Los Angeles, and we're going this coming week all the way to Israel with 1,200 people. It's going to be an incredible time there, and so this is a perfect stop off, and what a great time of the year to be here. Well, let me talk to you about the gospel according to Rome. You see, Rome was more than a city in Bible times. It was the center of an empire like no other, which celebrated man's ability to conquer. It was a city that told its own story, celebrated its great accomplishments, and required the people to honor Caesar as Lord. Rome as an empire was an arrogant human construction of systems and cities that claimed to rule the Creator's world. And so the message of the cross is the story of a Roman coward, a Roman cross, and a Roman centurion. It's a tale of two kingdoms. Caesar was a Roman king who built a spectacular empire that came to a very unspectacular end. And Jesus, an unspectacular, self-proclaimed king whose kingdom would spectacularly know no end. Of course, the crucifixion's recorded in Matthew 27. So at the time of Jesus, all of Palestine was under Roman occupation. Rome was the ruling power of the day, and its empire had spread to much of the known world. And here we are in Rome, where much of the world's events from that time was centered. From right here, Rome had established its influence and power over the nations of the earth. Caesar was exalted and even worshipped, and he was intent on extending his kingdom. His kingdom was impressive and powerful, it was spectacular, and it was feared. It had both military might and material opulence. It was everything that Jesus' kingdom appeared not to be. Little did Caesar know that he was playing a part in the establishment of a far greater kingdom. A kingdom that would know no end, a kingdom that could know no defeat, a kingdom and a king greater than any other in all of time and all of eternity. And it all culminated on that Roman cross, one terribly Good Friday. That juxtaposition is there for a reason. The reason we call it Good Friday is because what looked like a terrible loss was actually a victory in progress, the greatest victory ever won. What looked like the execution of a criminal was the execution of a plan, the greatest plan ever made. What looked like death for one was making a way for life for all of us, the greatest life you and I could ever have. As they went about dealing with Jesus like any other criminal, that day made it possible for him to be anything but a criminal. So in that sense, Rome helped make Good Friday good. So it's the story of a Roman coward. He was condemned by Pilate. He was the coward. Matthew 27:11 says, "Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' Jesus said to him, 'Well, it is as you say.'" It seemed like Rome had a victory, although it was a small one that day. They had quelled a potential uprising, keeping the crowd at bay and ridding Rome of the small rebellion of Jesus and his followers. They had kept the Jewish religious leaders on side. Pilate had given in to them rather than risk a riot and lose face in Caesar's eyes. They had executed this supposed rebel who was dividing the people. They had extinguished any claims that a king to rival Caesar was here. It was a worrisome day, but nonetheless a good one for Rome, or so they thought. By condemning Jesus to a cross, Rome made the way for heaven's mission to be accomplished on that Friday. Clearly, Jesus had enemies amongst the Romans and the religious leaders, but I don't believe he ever chose to have enemies or chose who his enemies were. They chose to be his enemies. Maybe you have been on the wrong side of cowardice and cowardly accusation. I know at times I have been. One of the things that shocked Caesar was Jesus chose silence. He didn't defend himself. In Matthew 27, verse 12 to 14, it says, "And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, 'Do you not see how many things they testify against you?' But he answered and said not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly." So many Psalms encourage us to let God deal with those who oppose us. I've found in life, the best thing you can do with your critics is simply outlast them. Jesus clearly did exactly that. His kingdom knows no end, the Bible says. So in other words, there were those that Good Friday who clearly were in opposition to Jesus. They were about to take his life, but his kingdom has well and truly outlasted them. I'm amazed to see in life how if we just do what King David clearly talked about in the Psalms over and over and over, and that is let God deal with those who come against us. It's incredible how God can silence the voices of those who perhaps are the most evil. I've certainly experienced that over the years. Some people are just not at all friends of the purposes of God. But like Jesus, he outlasted it, and I believe through the power of God, we can believe what Psalm 23 verse 5 says. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over." Listen to that in the Message. It says, "You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing." I really do believe that the Lord can do that for you. I believe that he can cause you to be the person who is like sitting at a 6-course dinner as God silences those who try to oppose whatever it is that the Lord has for your life. So remember, Rome was a great occupying power. It was the ruling force. What is it that is occupying the real estate of your mind or your heart today? That word occupy comes from a Latin word, and it means to seize. It's a verb, and it means to fill or take up space or to take control of. It's amazing how quickly the challenges we face in life can become like an occupying force which threatens to seize us, to control us and condemn us and conquer us. What's filling your heart and mind, threatening to control, conquer and condemn you today? How do you respond to your Rome? So often we want to fight the occupier with our own strength and our own power. But God dealt with the problem of Rome on our behalf through the cross. He accomplished through his love what you could never accomplish in your own strength. The cross proclaims that the answer to humanity's love of power was the power of his love. What brought death to one brought life for all. The Son of God was condemned, so as sons and daughters of men, we can be free. The power and pretensions of Rome were outflanked and degraded by the crucified and risen Christ. The message of the cross is that the occupier has been dealt with. The victory has been won on your behalf and on my behalf. It was the story of a Roman coward, and it's the story of a Roman cross. Jesus was crucified by Roman soldiers. in Matthew chapter 27. It's verses 27 to 30. It says, "Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, 'Hail Jesus, King of the Jews.' Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified." A Roman garrison unwittingly played into heaven's hands that day. They thought they were mocking Jesus by putting a robe and a crown on him, not realizing they were revealing who he really was. On other occasions, Jesus' followers and his own closest disciples urged him to show himself and even tried to make him king. But here now in heaven's timing, God used Rome for Jesus' coronation. "Hail, King of the Jews," they declared unwittingly, preaching the truth in their mockery. They even placed the messianic title above his head on the Roman cross for all to see. In Matthew 27, verses 35 to 37, it says, "Then they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there. And they put up over his head the accusation written against him, 'This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.'" Jesus' crime was his declaration of his mission as Messiah, an affront to his condemners. The Jews were angry because they wanted it to say he claimed to be the King of the Jews, as that was the charge against him, simply that it was a claim. But Rome declared on that Roman cross that this was the King of the Jews, lifted high for all to see. It never ceases to amaze me how God makes all things work together for good for those who love him and are called by his name. It's in Romans 8, verse 28 and 29, and in the Message, I love it. It says, "That's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is working into something good." God knew what he was doing from the very beginning. He decided from the outset to shape the lives of those who love him along the same lines as the life of his Son. The Son stands first in the line of humanity he restored. We see the original and intended shape of our lives there in him, in Christ. It's the story of a Roman coward, a Roman cross, and a Roman centurion. He was guarded by a Roman centurion. Listen to Matthew 27, verse 51 to 54. It says, "Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised." Verse 53 says, "And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many." So when the centurion and those who were with him guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, "Truly, this was the Son of God." A Roman centurion was charged that day to watch and wait for Jesus to die. They wanted to clear the bodies before the commotion of the Sabbath and the Passover. He didn't realize he was watching history in the making. Heaven and earth colliding. In Matthew 27, verse 45 and 46, it says, "Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?' That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I love this little poem that I heard from Katrina Henderson. It says, "Darkness loomed overhead as Jesus' life neared its end, cried out to God as though he were a friend. There was commotion at the temple as heaven's sacrifice was made, and the earth shook as mankind's debt of sin was paid." And of course, this centurion could only watch on in awe. So Rome declared the powerful truth. Surely this was the Son of God. He was and is indeed the Son of God. He was and is the King of Kings. Nobody took his life. He gave it up freely. Rome was in fact a player written into God's story. And this city, it played a role in revealing his glory to all people for all time. The triumph of Rome was in fact a triumph of God's own. And it was a triumph which made that terrible Friday good and made the good accessible to all of us. This ancient city had no idea then it was declaring the good news of the gospel according to Rome. So now we all have to ask the same question Pilate asked that fateful first Good Friday. It's in Matthew 27, verse 22. Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" That's something every one of us has to answer. What will we do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? This Good Friday, as you think about in your life, where you stand in terms of Jesus Christ. Do you stand on the right side? Do you understand that everything accomplished on that cross was accomplished for you? I hope so. What will you do with Jesus?